I've never seen something like this before. The Munk Debate stage was a sight of fireworks when Jordan Peterson butted heads with leftist writer Michael Eric Dyson over political correctness. But what ended up happening is a lot more than the audience came from, because the discussion you're about to see unravels the strands of reverse racism that's coming from the modern identity-obsessed left, and Jordan Peterson along with Stephen Fry came out looking at like the bigger men, despite the barrage of insults you'll see next. Just take a look at this before we dive into some very important ideas as it regards modern race relations and PC culture.
What's interesting, look at the flip side. If you have benefited from 300 years of holding people in servitude, thinking that you did it all on your own, why can't these people work harder? Let me see, for 300 years, you ain't had no job. So the reality is, for 300 years, you hold people in the bands. You hold them in subordination. You refuse to give them rights. Then all of a sudden, you free them and say you're now individuals. Not having the skills, not having the skills. I'm talking about America, first of all. I'm talking about American society, first of all. I'm talking about the Northern Hemisphere. I'm talking about every society where enslavement has existed, but I'm speaking specifically of the repudiation of individual rights among people of color in America who were denied the opportunity to be individuals. So I obviously and ideally, and I think Michelle Goldberg does too, agree with the emphasis on individuals. What we're saying to you is that we have not been permitted to be individuals. We have not been permitted to exercise our individual autonomy and authority, and the refusal to do so, to recognize me as an individual, means when you roll up on me and I'm a 12-year-old boy in a park and you shoot first, in ways you do to black kids that you don't do to white kids, you are not treating that person as an individual. If we're living in a society where women are subject to aberrant forms of horrid, patriarchal, sexist, and misogynist behavior, you are not acknowledging the centrality of the individuality of women. You are treating them according to a group dynamic. And if we get beyond the ability of people on the right to understand the degree to which they have operated from the basis of benefit from group identity, without having said, I'll end by saying this. The great American philosopher Beyonce Knowles said that it has been said that racism is so American that if you challenge racism, you look like you're challenging America. We are challenging inequality. We are challenging the refusal to see me as an individual. When we overcome that, have at it, we're all on equal plane.
So the remedy for the past collective injustice is current collective injustice. The racial discrimination of the past was a poison that can only be fought with the antidote of individual freedom, and it would be a tragedy if now, after all the evolution and process of civilization we've been through, simply decided to enact racial inequity in a different direction to try and overcorrect for the past. Now, I would like to talk about the two particular examples that Michael Eric Dyson just gave there. The women or people of color do perhaps face challenges in society that explicitly has to do with their race or gender. That's probably a diagnosis that a lot of people can relate to, but the cure he gives is actually worse than the disease. Sure, you can have individuals that come together and amplify their voice on a collective basis, and that's what we saw in the 19th century with the feminist movement or the civil rights fight, but being part of a movement that wants to win the rights of individuals with a shared characteristic is not the same as a collectivist view of society. And it's truly incredible that just as a society's escaping those past crutches of racism, that you'd see examples of calls like this from Michael Eric Dyson. Last year, after the Supreme Court struck down affirmative action policies, Michael came out in the open to proclaim that in 21st century America, race must constitute a merit. That sounds dangerously similar to what we heard in the 17th and 18th centuries, and it's a recipe for creating the same racial vendettas that pits groups against one another. So where does it stop? You need to see Jordan's sarcastic comeback that makes it clear that there really is no end to this kind of race hustling on a collective basis.
Let's assume for a moment that I've benefited from my white privilege. Okay, so let's assume that. That's fine.
Assumption.
That's what you would say. So let's say, here, let's get precise about this, okay?
Was that very individual of you?
Let's get precise about this, okay?
Let's get precise.
To what degree is my present level of attainment or achievement a consequence of my white privilege? And I don't mean sort of. I mean, do you mean 5%? Do you mean 15%? Do you mean 25%? Do you mean 75%? And what do you propose I do about it? How about a tax? How about a tax that's like specialized for me so that I can account for my damn privilege, so that I can stop hearing about it? Now, let's get precise about one other thing, okay? We'll get precise about one other thing.
Precise?
Yeah, precise, yes. And so, if If we can agree, and we haven't, that the left can go too far, which it clearly can, then how would my worthy opponents precisely define when the left that they stand for has gone too far? You didn't like equity, equality of outcome. I think that's a great marker. But if you have a better suggestion and won't sidestep the question, so let's figure out how I can dispense with my white privilege, and so that you can tell me when the left has gone too far, since they clearly can. And that's what this debate is about political correctness. It's about the left going too far. And I think it's gone too far in many ways. And I'd like to figure out exactly how and when, so the reasonable left could make its ascendance again and we could quit all this nonsense.
I like how Jordan pointed to Stephen Fry as the reasonable left, because he certainly does represent the reasonable left that our politics need. But what's even more interesting is that Stephen Fry and Jordan Peterson were seated together on one side as both in opposition to political correctness, but coming from different places. While Jordan Peterson sees PC culture as a resurgence of a Marxist story in society, Stephen Fry's opposition to it has more to do with how ineffective it is, more often being performative than genuine. But both agree that it's an example of the left going too far, which seems to be an end of the political spectrum that Michael Eric Dyson hardly even recognizes. If you read his ideas on racial justice activism, a common theme that comes up is his criticism of centrism as insufficient and naive. Being in the center is supposedly like being silently complicit, instead of working to help atone and correct for the past. In that case, while a lot of people tend to gravitate to the center, Michael's political center of gravity is way off to the left, to the point that anything else from a relative lens is just considered right-wing, and there's no greater example for the kind of things it gives you the license to say than this next heated exchange.
You're beginning at a point that's already productive and controversial. You're saying, how can he get his equality back? Who are you talking about? Jordan Peterson? Trending #1 on Twitter? Jordan Peterson? With an international bestseller? I want him to tweet something out about me in my book. Jordan Peterson, right? This is what I'm saying to you. Why the rage, bruh? You're doing well, but you're a mean, mad white man, and you're gonna get us right. And I have never seen so much wine and snowflaking. There's enough wine in here to start a vineyard. Are you looking for outcomes that can be determined equally, or are you looking for opportunity? If you free a person after a whole long time of oppression and say now you are free to survive, if you have no skills, if you have no quantifiable means of existence, what you have done is liberated them into oppression. And all I'm suggesting to you, Lyndon Baines Johnson, one of our great presidents, said, if you start a man in a race 100 years behind, it is awfully difficult to catch up. So I don't think Jordan Peterson is suffering from anything except an exaggerated sense of entitlement and resentment, and his own privilege is invisible to him, and it's manifest with lethal intensity and ferocity right here on stage.
Jordan, I'm going to have to let you respond to that if you would.
Well, what I derive from that series of rebuttals, let's say, is twofold. The first is that saying that the radical left goes too far when they engage in violence is not a sufficient response by any stretch of the imagination, because there are sets of ideas in radical leftist thinking that led to the catastrophes of the 20th century, and that was at the level of idea, not at the level of violent action. It's a very straightforward thing to say you're against violence. It's like being against poverty. It's like, you know, generically speaking, decent people are against poverty and violence. It doesn't address the issue in the least. And with regards to my privilege or lack thereof, I mean, I'm not making the case that I haven't had advantages in my life and disadvantages in my life like most people. You don't know anything about my background or where I came from, and it doesn't matter to you because fundamentally I'm a mean white man. That's a hell of a thing to say in a debate.
Let me just say.
Very, very brief, because I want to move on to men and women. A good topic next.
The mean, mad white comment was not predicated upon my historical excavation of your past. It's based upon the evident vitriol with which you speak and the denial of a sense of equanimity among combatants in an argument. So I'm saying again, you're a mean, mad white man, and the viciousness is evident.
Okay.
All you need to imagine is what would have happened if instead Jordan had used the element of race in insulting Michael Eric Dyson, and and it easily could have ended his whole career, but that's where you also sense the audience starting to pull back their initial enthusiasm with Michael's demeanor or his use of fancy vocabulary. Because throwing in someone's race into an insult while making a point about racism is like shooting your own foot in the debate. Michael Eric Dyson actually felt the pressure later to explain why he did that, and then doubled down on it, and he said that to no mean the supposed racial blindness he has to the other people's historic suffering. So as you can imagine, if someone allows themselves to clearly use racist insults to make a point about anti-racism, they can make perfect sense of anti-racist policies that seek to overcorrect for history, like preferential hiring, diversity quotas, or affirmative action. But it just so happens that those are the kind of politics that start to trend very close to the DEI-obsessed far left that none of these pro-PC culture panelists were able to define.
You want me to define, or one of us to talk about when the left goes too far, and if I'm, I certainly don't want to be a woman putting words in your mouth, but if I hear you correctly, what you're saying is that you want me to kind of renounce Marxist categories, or to...
It's up to you.
Well,
I just want you to do it. I want you to define when the left goes too far. You can do it any way you want.
Like I said, I think that the left goes too far when it is violent or censorious, when it tries to shut people down or no platform them, or when it acts violently. I'm not sure what you expect
Something
beyond
deeper.
that. Something deeper, how?
Yeah. Well, I'd like you to contend with the set of left-wing ideas that produced all the left-wing pathologies of the 20th century, and to define how you think standard left-wing thinking, which has a valuable place, goes too far, since it obviously does.
Has the right gone too far? Has the right gone too far?
Of course the right has gone
Tell
too
us
far.
how.
Well, how about Auschwitz?
I mean...
Well, I was talking about 20th
Is that
century
right?
politics.
What else? More recently, what has gone wrong with the right?
Look, I don't like identity politics players at all. I don't care whether they're on the left or the right. I've been lecturing about right-wing extremism for 30 years. I'm no fan of the right, despite the fact that the left would like to paint me that way because it's more convenient for them.
How has the right gone too far recently?
Well, where? It's threatening to go too far in identitarian Europe, that's for sure. It's gone too far in Charlottesville. It went too far in Norway. Like, how long a list do you want? And why am I required to produce that? To show you that I don't like the identitarian right?
I just thought I'd ask you.
I was actually asking you a question. So your assumption is somehow that I must be on the side of the right. It's like, look, the right hasn't occupied the humanities and the social sciences. It's as simple as that for me. If they had, I'd be objecting to them.
Say that again, I didn't hear.
The right has not occupied the social sciences and the humanities. And the left clearly has. The statistical evidence for that is overwhelming.
Sir, what about IQ testing in terms of genetic inheritance?
Sorry, we're here to talk about political correctness, and we've done a damn poor job
Oh,
of
I
it.
see. I gave you an example.
Okay,
now you can't answer it.
let's all then redeem our...
Here's the simple fact. You're supposed to fight the excess on either end of the political spectrum, but only after you've worked out which side those excesses are coming from and how big of a threat they pose. This particular debate was on political correctness, and there's certainly a majority of censorship and free speech restriction that's coming from the far left rather than the far right. If we were living in a place like the former Soviet Union or 1940s Germany, where ultra-nationalist or racial supremacist ideas were the birthplace of censorship, you'd be right in criticizing and pushing back against that. But in this conversation, that fundamental groundwork was not even established, leading to a lot of talking past each other. Jordan Peterson and Stephen Fry may not be the perfect match politically and religiously, but perhaps much of their work was already done when Michael Eric Dyson lost credibility after racist and personal attacks that fly in the face of the anti-racism that he himself advocates for.